Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, I am pleased to support the motion moved by the Prime Minister today in support of his statement to the House. Mr Speaker, in that statement to the House, the Prime Minister has outlined the program for the government that will see us leading into the November election. And what the Prime Minister made very clear is that this is not a government that is prepared to mislead New Zealanders about the difficult economic circumstances that we live in. A government not prepared to mislead New Zealanders about how tough it is at the moment to make progress. A government not prepared to go to New Zealanders with outrageous promises of expenditure without any plan for where that money may come from. Mr Speaker, Mr Goff, in reply to the Prime Minister, outlined essentially, if I may paraphrase his 20 minutes, a pile of, you would say, the worst aspects of his 9 years as a minister in the government. All of the misfortunate events that occurred during that time, with the rise in so many bad social statistics. Mr Goff outlined those and then said, Mr Key, you've had 2.25 years to fix them. You haven't, you've failed, and that's why New Zealanders will come running back to the Labour Party. Well, Mr Speaker, that shows the headspace that the opposition are in. That shows that they are not connected to what New Zealanders are thinking and feeling on a daily basis. And Mr Speaker, it is no wonder then that Mr Goff, at the end of his speech, failed to move a vote of no confidence in the government. Because he knows, Mr Speaker, that when it comes to the simple thing of the wages that New Zealanders collect, that New Zealanders today are taking home, if they're on the average wage, $64 more a week than they were in 2008. He knows that the rise in wages for New Zealand over the last 2 years has more than twice outstripped what Labor achieved in 9 years of government. 9 years of government and wages rose by 4% for average New Zealanders. 2 years of a national government and it's a bit over 10%. That's what Mr Goff knows, and that's why he wasn't prepared to move a vote of no confidence against the government. Mr Speaker, Mr Goff went on and talked about some of the pressures that New Zealanders face in their lives and his abhorrence for the concept of asset sales. Well, Mr Speaker, everyone knows that this country has a very heavy borrowing program. This country is deeply, deeply in debt. 85% of GDP is our debt measured against other countries. We are a Portugal, we are an Ireland, and we are some of Greece. Mr Speaker, we are a country that is in significant economic difficulty, and Mr Goff says his party can go out there and freely promise $5 billion of extra spending a year without telling New Zealanders where it's going to come from. Well, Mr Speaker, they aren't silly. They know it's going to come from that $64 a week extra that a national government has ensured they've got in their pay packets. Mr Speaker, he speaks about, well, not a bad title. Mr Speaker, he talks about the asset sales issue as if his own hands were completely clean in this matter. He was a minister in a government that sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of New Zealand assets and got nothing for them. Mr Speaker, what Mr Key and this government have outlined to New Zealanders is the prospect of saying, why not sell off a little bit of the asset that we've got if it enables us to acquire bigger assets. And the interesting thing is, here is a government, here is an opposition that lauds the fact that they bought back New Zealand Rail. Well, that's like buying a lame horse and telling everyone it's going to win the Melbourne Cup. Mr Speaker, it is not credible for the Labor Party to run a policy that says don't look at this particular aspect. David Cunliffe knows that. He said it in a speech just recently. And Mr Goff himself has said repeatedly that a public-private mix in the asset portfolio would not be a bad thing. And we've got quotes from him that I won't go into today. But the most extraordinary thing is the suggestion that if there was a minor shareholding sold in the state generating assets, the power prices would go through the roof. Well, I'll ask New Zealanders to consider this. Why did power prices rise by 72% over 9 years under Labor when over the same period of time we saw only 28% inflation. That's the sort of extortion that comes from state-owned enterprises at the present time. And Mr Goff, the other day, goes out with a policy and says, we're not going to take the dividends of state enterprises. That was before Christmas. Not going to take any dividends of state enterprises. That'll keep the electricity companies, I should say, that'll keep prices down. Then he comes back after Christmas and says, oh no, we need that $700 million a year to pay for part of our program. Well, you can't have it, Mr Speaker, both ways. You cannot, Mr Speaker, go out with a record like they've got on power prices and make the sort of claims that are being made by Mr Goff. The last 2.25 years of a national government have seen considerable slowing in the pace of power price rise. This government conducted the most comprehensive reform of the electricity industry with the Act passed last year that this country has seen in 20 years. And it will lead to stable prices. And the record speaks for itself. Between November 2008 and November 2010, the price in real terms was 1.1% increase. That excludes GST and it excludes the cost of carbon that are applied to those things. But nonetheless, Mr Speaker, an extremely impressive record for the government to date. And couple the regulatory environment with that record, then New Zealanders should not fear the opportunity that they themselves will get to invest in those companies. And I want to answer Mr Anderton with a suggestion that somehow these companies will end up in foreign ownership. For a start, the government has made it clear that should New Zealanders return it to these ventures beyond November 26th, we will continue to hold 51% of those companies. Mr Speaker, today Contact Energy is 24% owned by New Zealanders and 16% owned by local fund managers and local funds, including ACC, the Super Fund and KiwiSaver providers. That, sir, is a significant amount of that company where there was no protection for the majority of the shareholding. Mr Speaker, the same could be said of Auckland Airport, where New Zealanders hold currently 35% of the fourth biggest company in New Zealand, with a further 9% being held by institutions. Mr Speaker, in New Zealand, 70-odd% owned by the government, 26% owned by New Zealanders. That's the model. That's the model that we should be following. That is the model that we will follow, and it will give New Zealanders an opportunity. The irony in all this, of course, is that the Labour Party says New Zealanders must save more. They pushed forward the KiwiSaver program, which has proved very good. But where are the KiwiSaver funds invested? By and large, sir, offshore. So it is an utterly safe, safe, says Mr Mallard. Safe, says the financial genius on the other side of the House. Well, sir, have a look at what happened to the financial markets internationally over the last couple of years and see just how safe it is. See just how safe it is. Mr Mallard forgets that New Zealand is a country, as I said at the start of my speech, heavily, heavily indebted. And I want to suggest to the Labour Party they might like to think about this. No one owns the family silver if the debt is bigger than its value. And Mr Speaker, it is wrong for the Labour Party to try to convince New Zealanders that they can have their cake and eat it too. We are a government, sir, led by an extraordinary Prime Minister who will be straight up with New Zealanders and, Mr Speaker, will give them a good opportunity to prosper beyond the 26th of November election.